Thank you everybody for coming this morning to our first Lunch and Learn of 2023. We've got a year behind us now of doing these, and we've had some great topics. Bill has been to a couple of them in the past and approached us and said, I'd really like to tell our community more about what we do at WSDP. So we are very happy to have him and his team here with us to tell us more about what they're doing locally to help us fill that gap in the news. I'm Beth Mead. I'm the president of the Canton Community Foundation. We also manage the community foundations of Westland and Plymouth. You'll notice on your table there's a flyer for next month's Lunch and Learn, which normally we have these on Wednesday afternoons. This one will be on a Tuesday afternoon, and we're doing a session of the Civility Project. It'll be at Westland City Hall. So if you have, or even if you haven't, or if you already have and you'd like to attend another one of those, it's a really great program. I know that Wes hosted one with the Plymouth Chamber, so he can speak to the popularity of the program and what a great program it is. So I encourage you all to sign up for that. It is limited seating, so sign up early. If you have any topics that you'd like us to cover in these Lunch and Learns, please let us know, because we're happy to find speakers on just about any topic you could possibly think of. And now I'm going to pass it over to the Vice Chair of the Foundation, Dave Hammond.
Thanks, Beth. And I'll say that what we'll try to do, keep this informal. It's about an hour long. We want plenty of time for questions. So once we get to the question part of the program, I may walk around or ask you to come up, because we've got a few people on Zoom. So if you ask your question and you're not on the mic, they won't hear the question. So we'll figure that out, but if you see me wandering around with a mic, that's why. So it's my pleasure to have the folks from WSDP here. They're our friends and our corporate partners, and they're going to talk today about how local media, specifically local public radio, is filling the local news gap. And so we've got the staff. We've got Bill Keith, who's the station manager at WSDP. We've got his assistant station manager, John Krieger, here. And then we've got a couple of students who are staff people. We've got Anuya Shetty. She's a junior, and she's currently the news director at the park. And then Avneet Pranter, and she's from Salem High School. She's also a junior, and she's the public affairs director. So the four of them are going to be giving a little presentation. And just to tell you a little bit about the work that they've all done, it's really a gem in our community, the radio station. Bill's been there over 2 decades, and in 11 of those, they've been named Station of the Year here in the state of Michigan. They're really doing outstanding work. And then a couple of times, 4, in fact, they've made it to national finalists for Public Radio Station of the Year nationally. So they really are an exemplar of how to do things, how to involve students, how to get involved in the community. So we are pleased to have them here today. So Bill, you want to take it away?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you, David, for the opportunity to talk a little bit about the radio station. I approached David, I think about a year ago, with the idea of having 88.1 share a little bit about the station. And I really appreciated the chance to talk to him about it, because he came back and he said, it sounds like an interesting idea, but we need a little bit more focus for this. It can't just be about the radio station at large. How could we come up with a focus for this that will make it really interesting and engaging for the community? And we started putting our heads together and really came up with the idea about the importance of local news. We've realized over the years with the radio station what a big resource it is to the community in covering things happening in Canton and Plymouth. I often talk to people who will say, we send our press release to the radio station, and then usually within hours somebody is calling me to have a conversation about that and to write a news story or to do an interview for our community focus program. The station has been serving Plymouth and Canton for 50 years. It started back February 14th, 1972. Which is just amazing to think about. I started with the station back the fall of '91, and we were getting ready for the 20th anniversary, and I remember thinking to myself, I wonder if I'll be there at year 50, and it's like snap, it's there, and you're still here. But over those years, we've had, I would say, easily over 1,000 alums that have come through the station. We just did an alumni reunion back in October to celebrate the 50th anniversary. And we had over 100 people come back to the area to kind of relive their glory days at the radio station and to celebrate the impact that it had, not only in the community, but in their lives too. Whether they went into careers in media, which several of them had, or whether they went into teaching or were engineers or lawyers or doctors, they could all point back to things that they did at the radio station as having been really vital in who they became. We, especially at the radio station, have seen a real transformation in the radio station's reach since about 2010. Back in 2010, we became Plymouth and Canton's Hit Music. We did a format change for the radio station. The impetus was that the station was at a point where, and it had been at this point probably several times in the history, where the school district was having to ask tough questions about, can we afford to keep a radio station as part of the community, as part of the offerings of the school district? And it seemed especially serious at that time, so we got together some of our alumni. June Kirkutter, who's here, was part of our alumni advisory, and we started looking at the radio station as a whole. What are we doing well? What could we improve on? What about the programming? What about the fundraising, the outreach to alumni, the outreach to the community in general? And out of that group, the whole focus on Plymouth and Canton's Hit Music was kind of born. And that group also was instrumental in kind of really coming up with our mission for the radio station. We always knew that we were focused on serving the community and impacting students, but we really kind of put the words to that, and we said that 88.1 uses local radio to invest in the lives of young people and serve Canton and Plymouth. And because of the hard work of the students over the years, the station has been an award-winning endeavor. David mentioned the 11 Michigan Association of Broadcaster Foundation High School Station of the Years. We're really proud of that, including the last 5 years. 4 times we were the National Association of Broadcasters finalists for Non-Commercial Station of the Year from 2014 to 2017. Early in my time at the station, Canton Township recognized the radio station with a Community Achiever Award, and our students have earned countless individual awards because of the hard work and the dedication they have to the radio station. David did a great job of introducing our students, and John, our assistant manager. I'll just say really quick, we're very fortunate to be able to work with students as wonderful as Anuya and Avneet. Anuya is our news director. Both of them together host one of our more popular shows called K-Poppin', which if you haven't heard K-pop music, they bring it to Plymouth and Canton on Tuesday nights from 6 to 7. So popular that we even expanded it to another night too, where we have 2 other students that host the show. Talented writers do a great job of asking questions when they do interviews with community members. I know that Avneet is our public affairs director and coordinates the community focus program for the station, and has really become one of our, I would say, one of our top student interview hosts. Just asks some great questions of the community. So I'm really excited they're going to be able to share a little bit about the station and that impact. So I wanted to, before I have them share a little bit about that though, I wanted to really kind of talk a little bit about the changing local media landscape. Because I was thinking about it as we were getting ready for this, and as I looked back to the early 1990s, even through probably the early 2000s, this area was really benefited by having 3 or 4 local newspapers that were committed to covering things happening in Plymouth and Canton. You had the Observer and Eccentric newspapers for Canton and Plymouth. You had the Community Crier, which was focused on Plymouth and did a great job of, even while they were kind of trying to cover the Plymouth community, they also covered a lot of things happening in Canton. You had the Eagle newspapers. Even back at that time, I remembered Omnicom and local cable access and being able to go over to the local cable access stations and be able to be interviewed or share things that were going about the radio station. you look forward to today, and it's a totally different landscape. Technically, I guess you would say the Observer newspapers in a certain way still exists through hometownlife.com, but as of this past December, they've stopped printing their local newspapers in Canton, Plymouth, and many of the surrounding communities. I would point back to really probably 2005 and the Gannett ownership of Hometown Life and the Observer newspapers as really the beginning of the change, because then you started to see the impact of consolidation, and not only just to save money, but then I was remembering this morning, it wasn't uncommon that I would go downtown Plymouth on Main Street to the Observer newspaper's offices, and you could walk in and talk to the reporters. And it wasn't quickly after that that those offices were closed and they were kind of consolidated in their Livonia office. The next thing you know, that office is closed. And through the consolidation, reporters and editors that were really committed to this community began to see their jobs expand and expand and expand. They had to cover multiple communities, or their jobs were eliminated. And the staff grew smaller and smaller while they're still covering multiple communities. And it's not something that's only happened in newspapers. I mean, it's been a tale of radio too. If we look at commercial radio, consolidation has had many of the similar effects. We're lucky still. There are some things that cover this community. I was thinking about the Rock and the Ville, the local news magazines, kind of ironically published by former Observer newspaper people, but do a great job of spotlighting great things on a monthly basis that are happening in the community. And really, I think a lot of the news coverage for a community like Canton and Plymouth has become social media, websites, events that are happening. Almost people have to stumble on it by either going to some group's website, or if they stumble upon their social media posts. We're fortunate that 88 The Park is able to be here. It's able to be here as a training for students, but at the same time, serving the community through local news, local information programming that we're able to do. And I want to turn it over to Anuya to talk a little bit about our news coverage for the radio station and some of what's involved there.
Yeah, so news is a really big part of what we do at 88 The Park. It's something that a lot of our community relies on for local updates. And where we actually get those story ideas is from, as we've mentioned, press releases, and we get them from other local news sites, as well as websites and social media. But we also get direct outreach from different businesses, different groups within our community who would like us to cover their stories. And that's really what we do at 88 The Park, is we give a voice to communities and groups within Plymouth and Canton who otherwise might not have gotten a chance to put their story out. And that's really how the community gets information on the different events that these groups are holding, the different updates that we get from major groups in the community. And another big part of the news coverage is actually how we cover our news. Being a student radio station means that everything is run by the students, and that includes the news coverage. We have staff members come in every weekday after school, and they choose a topic to write a story on, and they write their own interview questions, and they'll call someone related to that story, and they'll have an in-depth interview with that person, getting as much information as they can, as well as quotes that they could possibly use. Then we have them write their own story. They go in for editing with John, where we learn more about how to make our news writing better, how to make our news coverage better, what questions we can ask better, and that really helps us develop as news writers, and we grow from, and I can see that from the newer staff members who just joined recently and how they're already growing in their news abilities. And we use those quotes that we mentioned earlier during our actual news coverage. We have people who we interviewed actually give their own opinion on the topic, and it helps the community feel more informed and make sure that our story seems like it has more depth and more substance to it, because it actually has backing from someone related to the story itself, and it's not just us saying what we've learned from reading online from other sources. And then, as we've said, that all the members of our staff participate, that means a big part of my job is actually scheduling. I schedule all the staff members to make sure everyone gets a chance to learn the skills and the different concepts that we learn through doing news. And you can see here, this is an example of our actual news calendar. We have all these names up there, and there's even more actually, because we have days in a month where we might not have news. But I really want to make sure that all these people are getting an opportunity, because that's what news coverage is for 88 The Park. It's an opportunity to get information to the community, but also give the students on the staff an opportunity to learn about the community and learn how the news process works. And so here we have an example of our news file. It's on the Student Voice in Action Subcommittee.
88.1 The Park News Update.
Plymouth Canton Community School students have the chance to work with the Board of Education to improve the experience for kids district-wide by applying for the board's new Student Voice in Action Subcommittee. The student-led subcommittee was established by the board as part of the district's new dynamic plan. Its goal is to create a direct link between the board and the student population. Subcommittee members will have input regarding district policies, the chance to further the district's goal of promoting student diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the financial resources to implement meaningful change for the student experience. Subcommittee places are open to students in grades 6 through 12, and meetings are expected to be held 1 to 2 times a month throughout the year. Subcommittee Planning Committee member Juhi Pawar says that the district is looking for more than just previous leadership experience in subcommittee members.
We don't ask for prior experience. It's all based on what is your creativity, what is your passion. If that can shine through in the application, then there's absolutely no need to prove to us that, oh, I've done this leadership position or I've done that. It's just, do you want to make a change, and are you capable of using your passion to make that change?
Applications are due Monday, October 10th. For more information about the Student Voice in Action Committee and the application process, visit pccsk12.com.
88.1 The Park.
So that was an example of our news coverage, and that's just one of many that we do daily. And you can see we used a quote from Juhi Pawar, who was on the planning committee for this committee, and that really shows that we're getting direct coverage from someone related to it, and we're getting information that we might not have been able to get had we not interviewed someone related to that story.
Another core segment that we run here at 88 The Park is Community Focus, and this is run like a podcast, and it is also found on our website under a podcast page link, and these are 10 to 15 minute long student-run interviews. It reaches that 10 to 15 minute mark because it's a more in-depth interview than a typical news interview would be, so we ask more deep questions, and we try to get a more emotional answer out of our interviewee, and these community focus segments typically cover different issues in the district, upcoming events, new things going on, people in the community doing something impactful, or we spotlight clubs and groups in the district or just in the Plymouth Canton area, and much more that we do on community focus. And the students that run these interviews, they entirely create their own questions, and they have an intro and outro that they make on their own, which is unique to most of our each staff members. When you listen to their community focuses, they have their intro, their questions, and a break in the middle of the community focus where we re-mention the guest and the speaker that we're talking to and the topic, and go back into the questions and into the outro. These community focus segments run on Wednesdays every week after our news file, and this is one of the core segments that we do. And you can see the photos on the right of the slide. We have interviewed the Michigan Philharmonic, we have interviewed teachers in the district, we have interviewed the Park Players Theater Company, and we get our interview topics from different websites like we do for news, or we have people reach out to us and say that we would like to cover something in community focus, which we then get in contact with them and cover that through community focus. Some other segments that we run are My PCCS Life, which recognizes the work of educators in the district and airs on select Fridays. This is hosted by PCCS Executive Director of Communications and Marketing, Nick Brandon, who is here with us today, and Assistant Station Manager, John Krieger. We also run Moments with Merits on select Tuesdays after Newsfile at 5:30, and that is run by our superintendent, Dr. Monica Merritt, and we discuss things going on in the school district through her perspective, and those are also full-length interviews with guests. We also run Women's Sports Spotlight, which highlights the work of women's sports athletes in the district and key individuals on our PCEP teams, and that runs on select Mondays.
So it's always fun in working in education when your students are a tough act to follow. And these two young women have done that today. The important part here is we talk about how public radio is kind of filling the news gap, is what we do to get our students ready to fill that role, because it's an interesting task that we give them. Newspapers have been cut, professional journalists are losing their jobs. You're going to step in there and be what the community goes to for its news. And that's the task that we have put on anywhere between 25 and 45 students between the ages of 14 and 18 in any given year. That's a tougher task than most people their age are given in life. And so it's important to all of us as 881 The Park staff members and district staff members, and Bill and I as the professional staff members here at 881, that we give them kind of a multifaceted foundation to be able to serve Plymouth and Canton, and do so in a way that also carries on best practices in terms of what radio is and what journalism is. And so what you're seeing with these two outstanding individuals is kind of the result of some of that process. The first thing it's important to note is that everything we do at 881 The Park is designed around best practices in commercial radio. Yes, we are a non-commercial station. We get money from the Board of Education. We are grateful for every one of those dollars. We raise $40,000 a year, $30,000 to $40,000 a year from the community. We're grateful for that as well. But we operate the station in terms of our news department as though it would hold up to the standards of a professional newsroom as best we can, because we know where we are in the media landscape that Bill was telling you about, and the void and the vacuum for local news that exists. So I came in to be the assistant station manager at 881 The Park following a 20-plus year career in professional radio and print journalism. And from the time that I was here, we kind of shifted things, knowing what was happening in the media landscape, kind of trying to be future ready to take 881 The Park News to a point where it would hold up as something that could be trusted as a legitimate news resource. And so we also have as a goal for our news staff the ability to learn skills and learn a trade that can give them the opportunity to walk out of a high school newsroom and into a lower level paying commercial radio job. I always tell our kids, it is a lot more fun to work for a radio station for minimum wage or just above in your college town than it is to scrape leftover ranch dressing off calf plates in the dorms. So if you're given one of the two options, being on the air is I think the more appealing option, having seen what some of my friends in college went through cleaning dorm food trays. And so everything that we do is designed to put students ahead of the curve to get that job, if they choose, when they leave Plymouth Canton Community Schools. Well, how do we do that? News training is, at first part, a three-stage process. We bring students in, and the first thing they do is they're assigned to a veteran staff member, one of their peers. They observe them for a news day or two. Just see what they're doing, see what it is to go through, get a story idea, write questions, have those questions evaluated, call and talk to someone that is oftentimes years older than they are. And that's one of the big jumps that our news training process acclimatizes students to, is the fact that you are going to get on the phone and talk to someone who may be 5, 10, 15, 20 years older than you are. But for the period of that interview, you are what I like to term a respectful equal. You're not going to refer to someone as by first name unless they tell you to, but also there is the reporter-interviewee dynamic that needs to be there. And so oftentimes we'll have students that will have to shake that off and realize that they need to get to a place where they can ask a sometimes difficult question and get an answer that will serve the community. Then we have a classroom process where they're given our news manual, and we go through some of the things like the basics of journalistic ethics. We only report what we get on tape. Yes, we'll use stories from other sources to give students an idea of stories that we've approved telling, but they are not to rewrite those stories. The story that Bill always tells to our young students is back in the age of the community crier. He was in downtown Plymouth one day, and a crier journalist walked up to him and said, "Hey, Bill, I enjoyed hearing my story on the air." And Bill said, "Yeah, we used your story as one of our news ideas." And the journalist said, No, I enjoyed hearing my story on the air." The student had just basically rewritten and changed a couple of words, the crier story a while back. And so we instill the basics of what is plagiarism, what is independence in terms of the material that we have. The mantra that we have is, if you don't have it on tape, you don't have it. Because we want always to protect ourselves, protect the station, protect the school district, protect the Board of Education, who are the owners of the radio station. And so students from a very early age get the basics of ethics and how to do things the right way. Then they'll go through a second training session with, again, peers, and they'll be engaged in the process and begin to know what it is to write an accurate lead, an accurate body in a news story, to be able to sift through a lot of the things they'll hear in an interview and get to the meat of what our community needs to know, and then we'll send them out and they'll start doing news on their own. We are very focused at 881 The Park on accuracy and representation of multiple points of view. The reason we have to do that is, first of all, it's good to do that as journalists. If you can't represent multiple points of view, in my opinion, as someone who kind of serves as the executive editor of our newscasts, you're not doing your job. I won't use Fair and Balanced. That one has been taken by a news network at one point, but really that's what we're looking at, is to be fair and to be balanced in our reporting. Why is that vitally important? Because we sit in a community and in a school district that is one of the largest districts in Michigan, is also one of the most disparate in terms of its political leanings. You look at Canton versus Plymouth Township versus City of Plymouth, ideology as to how government should run, how business should run, varies widely in our catchment area. And so it's very important that we sit from a place that goes down the middle, tells it how it is, and doesn't editorialize. One of the things that we tell our kids in our news writing is, if you're going to say something like, the daddy-daughter dance is a fun way to have kids spend a day with their parents, you better start that with Downtown Development Authority officials say that the dance is a fun way to do this. Because otherwise it reads as though you are expressing an opinion. And good news reporters don't express opinions. That's what opinion columnists are for. And so since we have realized that people are going to be turning to us more and more for their information, we have to be known as a representative of the school district, as a representative of the community, as someplace that's going to give you the straight news and not going to come at it with an ideological slant. You want to be very balanced in how you do things. Our news training helps students develop public speaking, critical thinking, writing, and analytical skills. Why is that important? Frankly, we live in a 140-character society. The shrinking attention span of today's consumer, because of the shrinking media digestion of Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, social media, means that we need to be able to sift through the material in a news story, to put out what needs to be presented, and to do so in a minute. That story that you heard earlier in our presentation, timed out at 1 minute and 6 seconds. It's part of an overnight. We air it at the top of the hour. Why? Because studies have shown it that after a minute in radio, which is what I like to refer to as a passive medium, if you think about it, radio is the thing that you have on while you're doing everything else. You have it on while you're cleaning the house, you have it on while you're driving in your car, you have it on while you're shopping, you have it on as the background of your life, not the forefront of your life. And so stories need to be short, well presented, concise, digestible, and able to fit in a shrinking attention span. And so our students need to learn public speaking skills, critical thinking skills, writing and analytical skills to be able to give you that consumable media situation. Why is that also important? Because, you know, the NCAA used to run an ad that said, you know, we have 30,000 or 100,000 student athletes and almost none of them are going pro in sports, you know, or almost all of them are going pro in something other than sports. To be a business leader, to be a government leader, to be an educator in tomorrow's generation, you are going to have those skills. I think our program gives students a head start in being able to succeed in any professional environment because of what they learn with us. And the last thing about our training, and really about our staff experience as a whole, is that it's staff-led. It gives students the chance to teach their peers. There is an oft-used saying in educational training that says, the best learning you do is when you serve as a teacher. And by teaching, you learn. By teaching, you grow. By being able to take the information that you get and pass it on to someone else and have them grasp the concept reaffirms your own skills. And so that's one of the big things with our news department, is to be able to give that ability to not only intake information, but to pass it along as well. One of the things that gives students is ownership and a stake in what they are producing. You find, you know, parents will tell me that as they're raising their children, items they give them often get treated in one way. Items students buy on their own, somehow the level of care can escalate. Well, when you are, because they know how hard they've had to work to earn the money, to buy the thing and have an ownership in that. That's the same thing we do at 881 The Park, is to give students an ownership in both the legacy of the station, making them aware that they are representatives of something that was here long before them, and God willing will be here long after them. And so you have a situation where they have that ownership, and also by teaching their peers, they know this is something that they've organically produced, which is a skill that today's youth, I think, don't get a chance to do as much. So that's kind of where we're at in terms of a mission of how we cover the news and the skills that we impart to young journalists, because as someone who's worked in professional radio, I see journalism morphing into more of a punditry type of environment and less of a actual reporting situation, because everyone can have an app. I know we have people here from Jacobs Media who wrote the book on how to do apps. And so you will understand of note that anything that can be push notified and anything that can be put on an app, if you can get it through the stores, you can sway things. What we try to do is at least give some start to the next generation of, no, there's a way to do things the right way and the way we want to serve the community. So that's kind of the mission statement of 881 The Park News and where we stand going forward, and trying to be that source for Plymouth and Canton, as other news organizations have left that in a bit of a breach.
Something John said about developing skills and students having an opportunity to develop skills really resonated with me, because I think it tells the story of why a program like 881 The Park is so important. And it's the same thing I would say about other programs at the high school and in the school district, the Rock Cafe or the theater program or robotics. But all these programs put things that they're learning in the classroom into real world experience. It's like running a small business. It makes the learning that they're doing in the classroom so much more tangible. So I appreciated you mentioning that, John. I just wanted to wrap up really quickly and then open it up for some questions. But I had a really good opportunity over the last couple of weeks to think about why local news coverage is so important. John mentioned our friends from Jacobs Media, Paul Jacobs here. They're one of the leading radio consulting companies in the world, but they're based here in the Detroit area. Paul recently wrote a blog. They do a daily blog as part of their website talking about the importance of local news coverage, framed by looking at kind of the changes that are happening with local newspapers. In his recent blog, he pointed out that it was a local newspaper that broke the George Santos story. A lot of people give credit to the New York Times because I think that's where it became the big news. But if it wasn't for this local newspaper that was covering the story, probably the New York Times may have even missed it. And all the media, not only the Times, but all the media, major media in New York would have probably missed it and would have missed out on what's becoming an increasingly bigger, as the days go by, a bigger scandal. Paul quoted in the blog a group called Axios, and they had pointed out that more than 360 newspapers were shuttered between late 2019 and May of 2022, according to the report. And they said the vast majority of these papers were printed weekly, a lot of the same type of newspapers that we had here in Canton and Plymouth. And they said at this rate, the country is on track to lose more than 1/3 of its total newspapers by 2025. It's already lost more than a quarter since 2005. Interestingly, for here in Plymouth and Canton, when Gannett took over Hometown Life, sort of the same time trajectory. It's more important than that big newspapers or big national stories might be missed, like the George Santos story. But I think it's also impacting what is covered in a local community. Who's going to be there to cover local school board elections or local arts news or things that local civic groups are doing or the difference that some student is making in their community? If there's not a local newspaper or if there's not a local news source like 88.1 The Park that's able to cover it. And we're glad to be able to be there as a community resource and to be able to serve the community through that. Paul also in the article quoted a gentleman named Dean, and I don't want to pronounce the last name wrong, Dean Baquet. He was the executive editor of the New York Times up until last year. And in a speech about the future of journalism, he was asked, from your perspective, what does public radio look like a decade from now? And I was really intrigued by this quote. He said, in 10 years, in most markets, the public radio station will be the primary source of local information in the community because of the vanishing of local newspapers. We always talk with our students that, yes, 88.1 The Park is a high school radio station. But we try to instill this idea that it's more than a high school radio station. It's really a community resource. It's really a vital part of the community. We look back, I mentioned 2010 when we brought our alumni advisory group together because of possible worries about possible cuts and whether the school district would have to cut the radio station. Since that time, since we made the format change and really invested in serving the community, there's never a talk anymore about cutting the radio station. It's a vital part of the way the school district communicates with the community. We saw it during the COVID-19 pandemic when our students were covering not only the pandemic news, but also the community news from their bedrooms, from the closets in their bedrooms as they were trying to record news stories on their phone and emailing it in, or as we were emailing them interviews with local community leaders so that they can then listen to the interview, find the news audio that they wanted to use for their story, write their story, record their story, email it back in, and get it on the air. It was a real cool time to see how the students were invested in making this radio station such an important part of the community. So we're excited to be able to reflect a little bit about it, but also to share a little bit about it and to be part of a community that has, for over 50 years, or just almost over 50 years, invested in making this radio station possible. I know John's seen the experience because he's also been a student at the radio station. I have that same benefit. I was able to graduate in the mid-'80s from Salem High School and work at the radio station and had that kind of epiphany moment where I said, I want to do that for the rest of my life. And not only just work in radio, I want to go back and work for the Plymouth Canton schools at the high school radio station because I saw the difference that it made for me. So thank you very much for giving us a chance to share a little bit about it. And if there's any questions, we'd be glad to let Anuya and Avneet answer them.
So let's open it up for questions. I just realized I don't have the walking around mic, so if you want to come up and ask a question, or I can kind of get to the first row, I think, with the cord here. But just raise your hand and we can come to you. And I can start it off. You talked a little bit about the consolidation continuing, and it doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon. What are the opportunities that you all see going forward as consolidation continues? Where can you guys grow your coverage, and where are the opportunities to make a difference?
That's a good question. That's something that I think you need to reflect a little bit on, about ways that we can grow and change the things that we're doing. We often, because you're in the midst of doing it on a day-to-day basis, it often feels like trying to keep what you've got up and running and trying to make sure that the newscast gets on the air and trying to make sure that this week's Community Focus program is ready to go and that it's on the computer and ready to air. We've seen it change the way we cover the community through these 30-plus years that I've been at the station. And so even though many of the things that we do kind of maintain the same emphasis, I'm sure there's been changes in it that we...
You know, I'll piggyback on Bill here. I think one of the changes that you'll see is an increasing partnership with district resources. For a long time, 88.1 The Park has been just a radio station. You are going to see within the next 6 months to a year, Plymouth Canton Community Schools continue to enhance its digital presence, to enhance its multimedia presence, to offer a better experience, an enhanced experience for district families. I think you're going to see 88.1 The Park be a part of that as the landscape of media consumption becomes more digital. The Board of Education's had forethought in being at the forefront of that. I know that the PCCS Communications Department is as well, and to kind of build on what Bill was talking about, it's now about how can 88.1 be a partner in that to really enhance coverage. Also, as our staff numbers grow, there are different ways to get students involved. We, a few years ago had a staff of 25. We're now going to be, with our spring auditions, probably up over 40 into 45. So there are going to be different ways to get students involved in direct reporting. I would not be surprised to see 88.1 The Park take a more active role in going out into the community and serving as kind of an adjunct to some of the journalism things that the park does to be able to go out and cover stories. We've done some partnerships with the Prospective newspaper. So I think what you're going to see in the growth of that is 88.1 The Park need to go out and be more of what those reporters were for those newspapers and being on, kind of on the ground and getting the experience of going out and covering an event. That is one thing that hasn't been in our repertoire that I think will be as the district's multimedia opportunities increase to serve our families in the community. So you should look for that coming down the road and being able to serve the community in that way.
One thing I would add to that too is one of the things that I've seen over the last several years that we did is we started doing some election night coverage and giving the students a chance to be there late on a Tuesday night in November, waiting for school board election results to come in or some of the other local races. And that's been fun too, because I don't think our students are always tuned into what's going on election-wise. And so having to brush up on who's running for state house, who's running for the congressional seats, who's running for school board, and to do interviews with all the school board candidates has been a good experience that we've been doing over the last bunch of years.
So for those of you who might have been watching on the Zoom or not aware here today, that's the voice of June Kiercutter. She's the president of the Juniper Group and also a member of our Alumni Advisory Committee. So the reason why she knows that information is that these are things that have taken place in monthly Alumni Advisory Committee discussions and things as we've brainstormed visions. So this isn't just someone who's coming in and using the word "we" without that connection. June's been a longtime supporter of the station and is one of our distinguished alumni winners, so award winners. So she knows of what she speaks. I know there were a couple other questions.
Yeah, Stephen back here. Hi. Thank you all for coming out today. That was really, really interesting. And Bill, I remember those discussions back in 2010, having been on school board at the time, and there were some of us that were going to like lay down in the road and keep the,
we appreciate
radio
you.
station from being cut because we knew what a jewel it was for the district and the community. And also, now I want to comment on what you just said and ask if you've, as someone who's now on Canton Township Board, have you guys communicated with us at all? Because as an organization that still runs a cable station, maybe there's some partnership opportunities there. So I think it's important that we make that connection and see if there's anything that can be done to make that happen sooner rather than later. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I originally, when I first started at the radio station, out in front of the board office, they used to have like a little house-type building. It was an office of some, now it's a big office building. It got taken down. But I always had this like dream, wow, that would be a cool place for a radio station in that little house. Or like on a storefront in downtown Plymouth. And then as we started talking about more, we started being like, well, why couldn't there be a studio down at the Board of Education office? Or why couldn't there be a studio in Canton Township at either the administration building or at Village Theater or at the Village Arts Factory
so
or
yeah,
at,
definitely.
so there's a lot of,
we have the expertise too, so that would be good to have that.
We'd love to have a chance to have those meetings and discussions.
We'll make
So.
that happen. But my question was more about filling the void of local news. And sitting here and having sat at the school board meetings, fewer and fewer times is there ever a reporter at our meetings. In fact, it's probably been 2 years since I've seen one here. And I remember, starting on school board in 2006 and being bombarded by different reporters from different organizations to answer questions about things that just happened in that meeting. And now I never get asked questions. And so my 2 questions. One is, like, how do you balance school-based news versus community, based news? And do you get ratings that understand, like, who your audience is based on, our great students versus adults out in the community?
Yeah, I would say we try to do a good balance between school-based news and news in the community. We're always scanning websites and social media of the local organizations, trying to make sure that things that are happening for those groups are things that we're covering. Interestingly, the whole decision to close the Canton and Plymouth Observers, I think I saw that in somebody's social media post. It was what caught me off guard. I was like, I hadn't even heard this coming. And so quickly emailed the Observer saying, could we get an interview with somebody? And they, of course, forwarded it up the food chain, and we got a corporate statement from Gannett about how they're going to continue serving the community, even though there's changes in delivery, what you would expect. But we're trying to make sure that those issues that are important in the community, things that are happening in the townships and in the city of Plymouth, are a vital part. And of course, we do cover quite a bit of school news. I mean, that is our big emphasis, I would say. Ratings, yes, thank you.
That's more difficult.
Yeah, we don't subscribe currently to Nielsen for ratings. Interestingly, though, I mean, through back channels and things, we've heard from, we've had friends that work in media, and they'll see us pop up in the local ratings for Detroit, which always amazes me because we cover such a small western segment of the Detroit. So for us to even show up in a small way speaks to the fact that a lot of people in Canton and Plymouth are listening. And we hear more anecdotally about people listening. I mean, you go into town and you're wearing an 88.1 sweatshirt, and somebody stops you and says, that's my favorite radio station. I listen to you guys all the time. Or we're at a community event and people are coming up. I listen to you guys all the time. I remember one of our students was floored. He was out at the event, and this person came up and said, "You're Cameron? I listen to your radio show all the time." And I thought he was going to faint. And so we're always having to tell that to the students. You may sometimes think that people aren't listening, but people are listening, and in pretty large numbers, too. I mean, there's, at any given time, thousands of people that are listening and connecting with the radio station. And I remember when we were thinking about changing the format to Plymouth and Canton's Hit Music, I was a fan of our more indie rock format, and I said, I don't know, would anybody listen to us play pop music when there's so many stations that have bigger budgets and more experienced DJs and can do it with a lot more flash? And one of our alums at the time said, if you do it and you focus on the community and you're talking about things going on in Canton and Plymouth, and you have your students on the air, people will listen because you're talking about what they care about, and they're hearing it from people that they care about. So,
And Bill, isn't it
it's
true?
been exciting to see.
Isn't it true that so I'm assuming you don't get the Nielsen ratings because of cost. It's prohibitive.
Sure, yeah.
But are there other metrics like fundraising, being a non-commercial station, that you can point to
Yes.
show the reach and the impact and how that's growing?
Yeah, well, that's a great point, David. When we started, we do two major fundraisers, our auction in the spring, our pledge drive in the fall. When we started our pledge drive, I can remember we were on for a week asking people to call in and give. And it was like pulling teeth. I thought these kids were gonna die. I mean, they were stretching every way they could trying to get people to call in. I think that first year we raised $900 in a week. It was painful fundraising. And I thought, boy, maybe this isn't the best way. But over I don't know how many years now, 15 years that we've been doing the pledge drive. This past year, we raised, I think, just over $22,000 through the pledge drive. And that's been in the last couple years that we went from like being at 12 or 13,000 during the pandemic year, jumping to $20,000. And I remember John and I were sitting there talking, maybe we shouldn't do a pledge drive fall of 2020. Maybe it's too much of an ask to go to the community when things are tight for everybody and ask them to support the radio station. And we decided to do it just to see what would happen, and the community just came right back. I mean, I think that year we raised right around 20,000, and we knew, we could see right away. And our auction too has jumped to, I think we raised just over 26,000 this past year. So it's more of those anecdotal kind of situations where we're able to kind of gauge the community's support for the station.
Other questions? Right here in the front row?
I think a big part of when adults think of like kids nowadays, they think that a lot of kids don't listen to radio, but you'd be surprised with a lot of kids driving also nowadays. A lot of my friends will say that, you know, they'll have the radio on, they'll have 88 on the Park on, but now we're also expanding, kind of flowing with how media is changing. We're expanding to websites, and we're expanding to having apps that you can listen to. That way, even though it's still radio, it's radio on different wavelengths, different ways that people can listen to. So we're still expanding that, kind of changing to how the new generations are consuming media, so that people are still getting the different information that we're putting out through the radio, and they're still consuming that in ways that that these generations might feel easier to. But we're still having the radio open so that we're really expanding to as wide of an age range as we can, so that as many people can get that information. And I think continuing that flow of developing as the media changes is really what's going to be the biggest help in making sure that we're able to keep 88 The Park really relevant to the community, and making sure that enough people are gaining the information that we're putting out.
To add to that, I think one of the biggest ways that we reach our generation is through our social media accounts. And the way that we set up our social media accounts, where we have our social media director who is a student, and in that way I think that we can set up our social media so that other kids our age can relate to the posts, or their posts that we know they'll find interesting, because as kids we know what kids want to see on social media and how they'll interact with social media based on our preferences. So I think that's another way that we would get the word out about listening to 88.1.
And I think it's one of the fun challenges of our station. We're always talking to the students about the audience that we're targeting tends to be their parents in the community with the music that we play and kind of the focus of the station. So it's trying to help them develop the skills of how do you communicate to an audience that maybe you're not part of. How do you, is the thing that you're saying on the air something that audience is going to care about? So it's kind of mixing that. I think adding to the skills that they have in finding ways to reach beyond themselves.
I'd also like to add before, another way that we're also expanding is our music itself. Although we still play top 40, we have specialty shows, which is where students that are on our staff get to play music that they enjoy on the air for a couple hours a week. And I think that's one of the biggest ways that we're connecting to the younger audience, because having students play songs they like is bringing in other kids who also listen to that. I can see that with us and our show K-pop, and K-pop is such a big thing amongst the younger generation right now. So we get a lot of stories. I hear from my friends who say they tune in during our show so that they can listen to K-pop, but then we also hear it expanding. I hear it I had a staff member tell me that her grandmother listens to our show every Tuesday, which was at first a shock, because I always thought K-pop was just a younger generation kind of thing, but I see that it's expanding, and I think that's one of the ways that we're really connecting with the younger generation, changing as the music tastes also change, and applying that to our radio station as well.
We've got time for a couple more questions. Millie, I saw you had a question.
So a big part of when we're actually training our new staff members is that we explain that although we, as we say, a respectful equal, you still have to understand that these are adults who have experience. If they're being rude, of course, stand your ground, but also stay as respectful as possible, because you don't know why they might be reacting that way. So of course, stay respectful, but we also make sure that our staff members understand to respect themselves, because we're still people, and we understand that if someone is being especially rude to us, that we make sure that they're standing their ground. We have our station managers here who we talk to when these things happen, because we're still kids and there's still things that we might not be able to handle, even though we're being put in positions that are more, that people see as more mature than the age that we are. So we kind of learn as we go. If we deal with a situation like that, we have our station managers, we have our peers, we kind of talk to each other and see how we can handle the situation best. And if it's someone who we think is not someone we want to work with again, then that's where we kind of move it to our station managers, and they figure out the best ways to handle that kind of situation. But we also have our peers to rely on in ways if we feel like we've been affected at all. We have them to talk to, and we have our station managers who are always open as well.
Okay, if we don't have any other questions, I think we're right on time. So I want to thank you all. I want to thank our panelists from SDB coming out here and sharing about how they're filling the local news gap. And I want to thank you for coming to our Lunch and Learn. I want to remind you next month, and you have a flyer in front of you, our next Lunch and Learn will be in February on the Civility Project. We're very excited about that. We're going to have a nice big crowd, so if you're interested in coming to that, make sure you RSVP early. It will be in Westland. For the first time, we'll do our Lunch and Learn in Westland at the ballroom there at City Hall. So thank you again for coming. And Beth, you want to say a few words before you go?
I just wanted to say thank you again to our panel for coming in today, and we've always enjoyed the connection that we have with WSDP. We're the financial sponsor for the radio station, and it's been a great partnership that we've been able to share. So if anybody's interested in learning more about how you might be able to help with some of these wish list items, please contact us as well, and we can tell you how you might be able to make donations. They've been very creative in the way that they will benefit the radio. So thank you again for coming.
Thanks, everybody.